because not all of us are, completely knowledgeable about Lebanon. So could you please give us some idea of the country and people and what the refugee situation is there?
Thank you, Kate. Before I start, just allow me to inform the students that are here today that I have been at CGI U several times before, at all CGI's events, done several activities like the ones you are doing right now. So hopefully one day, one of you will be in a position to help, either in refugees crisis or any other crisis, because what I learned at CGI U is what I am implementing right now at the position that I'm holding. For those of you who don't know, I come from Lebanon. Lebanon is a country in the Middle East that is highly affected by the Syrian crisis, the Syrian war, especially by the size, the amount of refugees that have entered Lebanon over the past few years. Lebanon is a country of 4 million people, 10,452 square meters. Just a small comparison, the Bay Area here is twice the size of Lebanon, and the population here is almost double the population of Lebanon. It's about 7.5 million in the Bay Area. So you have to imagine 4 million refugees decided to come into the Bay Area in a couple of years. And those 4 million refugees need help, need healthcare, education, jobs, you name it. Lebanon is a poor country. We have a very bad budget, always debts and unbalanced budgets. At the same time, while we were struggling with educating the Lebanese children, we are faced now with what is known by the Syrian crisis and the Syrian refugees that are in Lebanon. We have 250,000 Lebanese students in the government system that I run. I have 450,000 Syrian school-aged child that needs to go to schools, so more than the Lebanese students that we have. In order to deal with the situation, we had to think. We looked at a case study around the world to see how they handled such situation. It didn't exist. Last time, or one of the times I attended CGI U, I went with President Clinton to New Orleans to deal with the aftermath of the hurricane. The hurricane hits 2-3 days, and then you have to deal with the situation after that, and you get help from all over the world. While in Lebanon, we've been having this impact, like a hurricane, on daily basis for the past 5 years. It's not ending. It's growing by the day. The number of refugees is growing by the day, and the challenge is bigger and bigger every day. Now, how did we deal with it? As I said, we had to think outside the box, think creatively. The NGOs and the international organizations that were present there were not able to handle the numbers. Most you would see from an NGO, they can take on 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 students, but we have almost 500,000. So when I took on this post, I decided that the government should partner with the private sector, the NGOs, the international community, the international organization, and go after the donors and say, we are prepared to do it. We're prepared to allow every child to go to the classroom, because I believe that all children have the right to get quality education. And we started operating double shift system. So we run the same school twice, once in the morning and another time in the afternoon. We use the part-time teachers to come and give the lessons in the afternoon. This costs money. So we put a plan together. That plan, we called it RACE, Reach All Children with Education, part of the No Lost Generation impact that's been proposed by the UNICEF and the United Nations for Lebanon and the neighboring countries. To cut the story short, we are now halfway through. We enrolled 200,000 Syrian refugee children in the Lebanese systems and the Lebanese schools. And we still have 250,000 that we're working on. We're trying to put them in school by the end of the academic year 2016, 2017, before they become a lost generation. Just closing note on that topic. Where Riyadh comes from in Iraq, he will talk about his experience there. But now some of his neighbors, people that from his community, after he left, are now refugees in my country, not just from Syria. So the problem is growing by the day, and unless we have soon political solution, an end to the war, this crisis will not only be affecting Lebanon and the Middle East and Europe, it will be affecting the world, as you probably heard, because of the refugees situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you. But let's hold our applause until the end of the discussion so we can just let everybody jump in. It's so valuable to have that kind of background and perspective that it's such a small country population-wise, and yet it is hosting so many refugees. And I'd like to turn to Maya now and ask her to just kind of spell out for us. We probably take it for granted that education is a good thing, but please tell us in more specific terms why education is so valuable, and especially for these children.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you everybody for joining us. Honestly, I think we can't think about the future without thinking about education. If we think about having communities that are cohesive, successful, prosperous, education is the only way that provides young children and young men and women with the tools and the skills to be able to build that peaceful and sustainable future, environmentally and economically. There are many quotes from leaders around the world about the importance of education. The different nations have gotten together and put education as a right in the Declaration of Human Rights. And yeah, simply, also on a basic level, education provides youth and children with the sense of security and hope. If you look at societies that have been hit by political crisis, such as the Syrian one, just to give you an idea, prior to the crisis, education was highly subsidized in Syria, and it cost a student $30 per year to go to university. So it's a community that highly values education, and looking at the crisis today, in that country and in other countries, there are families that change their location of living, that are displaced internally and externally just so that their children access education.
Thank you, Maya. It is very astonishing to think that in Syria, college used to cost $30 a year. That's not something that we could even imagine here in Berkeley. And it's certainly true that education is a human right. Education is also a key part of the new Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda for 2030. So it really is, as Maya says, a way we can't even think about the future without that. But I'd like to turn to Yad now and ask him to share with us what happens when war interrupts your education.
Thank you. I guess whenever this question comes up, what would be the effects of war and the aftermath of war in any country? I'm kind of hesitant to answer that because I think that there's always someone who has it worse. But personally, I have lived through actually 3 wars, the Iraq against North and all that. There's like a few after. So I think one thing that I've learned through those years is the hardest thing, there is a lot of people who, unfortunately, I guess, we have gotten good at bringing the community back onto their feet. Often people like my panelists here, they bring the education to where you are, but I think the hardest thing after that, during that aftermath war, is the connection. You get disconnected. For you, it becomes so hard to relate to what's happening outside of your region. If it's regarding your education, if it's regarding your career, or actually in the scenario when NGOs decide to move to a country and start an entity. So that sort of is a very non-tangible thing, and there isn't actually a manual for it. But the sort of, I guess that's something, again, learnable, but it takes time. So that's one of the challenging things for someone who wakes up to go to school to think about. It's like, all right, so I'm going to be studying for the next 4 years or 5 years, depending on your education. What am I exactly going to be doing? Am I going to be doing my profession, or am I going to be kind of waiting for another unfortunate incident to happen? So that sort of communication channel goes away once there is a war due to all the other unfortunate things, if it's economy, if it's the actual political instability, or so. So yeah, that sort of kind of reflects on a lot of things happening, actually, depending on the situation.
Yes, it's a very compelling circumstance that you were in and so many other children. Mr. Minister, you mentioned because of the scope of the situation in your country with more Syrian school children than Lebanese school children, you've gone to the double shifts, which is of course a good use of schools that, school space, but there are so many other costs involved for teachers and materials and equipment. Could you say a little bit about funding this? You did mention, the private sector, but I know that you attended the February pledging meeting in London, and perhaps you can share with us some more ideas about how, how we can think about funding and supporting Lebanon and other countries of asylum.
Absolutely. The situation with funding crisis is always a day late, if not more. And in education in particular, that's something that is very dangerous, because by the time we go and put conferences together, I'm talking the international community and the donors, and they make pledges, by the time they materialize, probably a year will go by, and then sometimes the pledges are not respected. Most of the times, not all the pledges are respected. So if you leave a child out of school for a year or 2 years, by the third year, it's going to be difficult to bring these children back to school because of the age difference, because of what they have missed. And some of them now have been out of school for 4 years. So you can imagine why we're calling it no lost generation. We're putting pressure on the international community to act, and act fast. What I think should happen is that the United Nations should put together a fund on reserve for emergencies. So anytime a situation like that occurs anywhere around the world, there will be funds available to start moving and start the process of helping out. We have tried in many ways. We are working, we're getting aid from many donors, from UNICEF, UNHCR, USAID, from Germany, from the UK, DFID, Norway. Many countries around the world now are coming in saying we want to help to educate the refugees. While this is good, and while I committed all the resources, manpower, the schools, everything we have in Lebanon, I also have to say that sometimes we also need, and we work with, like the private sector, with NGOs, such as Jussur, for example. They're doing some work also in Lebanon, and many others. But the size of the problem requires much more serious commitment, funding commitment. So the situation now is, I committed everything that I can to try and put all these children in schools. And this year I got funding for about 180,000, but we went over 200,000. I said the more we show the international community that we are serious about educating these children, the funding will come. And I'm getting a lot of assurances from many world leaders around the globe, from everywhere. But the problem is the longevity and the long-term support. It's one thing to bring these kids into the school. It's another thing to keep them in school. And this crisis is not likely to be ending soon. We don't know when they will be able to safely return home. When the war ends, they should be gradually tried to go back home. But usually, I'm told from many politicians around the world that you have to plan for a couple of years before this becomes a reality. Well, this cannot happen without serious funding. That's why the London conference was there. A lot of commitment for education. The World Bank announced, the president of the World Bank, Dr. Jim Kim, was in Lebanon about a week ago, and he announced that he's giving us $100 million for education because of the seriousness that the project that we put together is showing, and because of the results that we are delivering. This is not enough, because we, from the plan that we put together, we need $350 million a year for the next 4 years. This is good planning. This will make everybody comfortable, and you will start working thinking that tomorrow you'll be able to maintain and keep these children in school. Again, think about it. 1.6 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon, 500,000 Palestinians from before, few tens of thousands from Iraq, and we are only a country of 4 million, a country that is financially broke. Yet, we are taking on this responsibility more than any country in the world with the strongest economies. When we saw tens of thousands going into some countries in Europe, the world went crazy. Everybody started thinking how to take them back home. We cannot cope with this pressure. So Lebanon is still standing on its feet, but we need more support, more funding, and hopefully the voice of those students that are here today is going to help to make this a big campaign for refugees, for children, for the right for every child to get education anywhere around the world.